Generally speaking, most name actors are hired for their ability to perform dramatically or comedically. And while the majority of movie roles require actors to speak, emote, move around, and basically get involved, there are a few exceptions to the traditional wisdom where top-billed performers were tasked with pretty much doing nothing. So with that in mind, I'm Josh from Whatculture.com, and these are movie roles where the actor basically does nothing. Eric Stoltz, Anaconda. Eric Stoltz plays the part of anthropology professor Dr. Stephen Cale in 1997's cult fave B-movie Anaconda, and though he's very much present for the film's establishing scenes, before the end of the first act, he's actually incapacitated with a wasp sting to the throat, which does, to be fair, sound absolutely awful. This, however, leaves Cale confined to the ship's bed for almost the entire remaining hour of the movie, a large portion of which he in fact spends unconscious following a nervous reaction to said wasp sting. And given that Stoltz was one of the ensemble's better-known cast members at the time, having appeared in Pulp Fiction, Rob Roy, and Jerry Maguire in the years prior, banishing him to bed for the vast majority of his screen time was certainly, well, it was certainly a choice. Cale ultimately plays such a small, insignificant part in the movie that it probably would have made more sense to just have him be one of the giant snake's first victims. Mark Hamill, Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Now, generally speaking, this list isn't concerned with cameos, but considering that Mark Hamill was widely expected to have a major role in Star Wars: The Force Awakens, it's certainly fair to include him here. With the film's opening crawl mentioning Luke Skywalker's disappearance, it seemed like a sure certainty that Luke would make a heroic, fan-serving, lightsaber-toting appearance in the third act to bail out the heroes in their moment of need. But instead, Hamill appears for just 75 seconds in The Force Awakens' very last scene, as Rey heads to the planet Act 2 to present an exiled Luke with his lightsaber. Now, Hamill doesn't even utter a single word in the scene, instead simply turning around and staring at Rey and his lightsaber before director J.J. Abrams wipes to the end credits. Naturally, such a scant showing for Luke left many fans frustrated that they'd have to wait a few more years to see Hamill reprise his role in earnest. But the actor certainly made well off the cameo, given that he reportedly made around somewhere between $1 to $3 million for what was surely only a day's work on set. Jamie Lee Curtis, Halloween 2, and Halloween Kills. The case of Jamie Lee Curtis in the Halloween franchise is especially curious given that she's had disappointingly small, even insignificant roles in 2 separate entries into the series where she was marketed as the lead. It all began with 1981's original Halloween 2, where following the events of the first film, protagonist Laurie Strode spends the entirety of the sequel confined to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. More to the point, Laurie stays in her hospital bed for the first 2 acts of the movie, with the opening hour instead focusing on Michael Myers making his trip to the hospital while Dr. Loomis attempts to stop him. And even in the third reel, Dr. Loomis does most of the heavy lifting in terms of facing off against the villain. Somewhat fittingly then, if perhaps for all the wrong reasons, the second entry into David Gordon Green's new Halloween trilogy, Halloween Kills, again sees Laurie stuck in Haddonfield Memorial for the whole damn movie. Laurie is left recovering from injuries sustained at Michael's hand in the 2018 film, and with only around 10 minutes of screen time throughout, takes a backseat to both Michael's rampage and the angry Haddonfield mob. And while Laurie again felt sidelined in Halloween Ends, at least you can't say that Jamie Lee Curtis did nothing. Tobin Bell saw. In the case of Tobin Bell's role in the original Saw film, his passivity was entirely the point. Bell appears for a few blink-and-you'll-miss-it moments in the movie as John Kramer, a patient of Dr. Lawrence Gordon's who is fleetingly glimpsed in a flashback set at Gordon's hospital. But of course, that's not all, as Bell is also secretly playing the corpse in the middle of the bathroom where Lawrence and Adam are chained up, because it turns out, well, Kramer is the Jigsaw killer and has been hanging out in the bathroom as a fake corpse the entire time. While Bell also lends his voice to Jigsaw throughout the movie, he spends the overwhelming majority of his screen time just laying prone in the middle of the bathroom, only rising to his feet for that jaw-dropping final reveal. Given that Saw went on to become a pop culture phenomenon, Bell scored the most iconic and lucrative acting role of his entire career, while mostly just laying on a gross floor. Elizabeth Shue, Back to the Future Part 2 and 3. The first Back to the Future ended with Marty and his girlfriend Jennifer traveling back to the future with Doc to save their kids. But when Claudia Wells was unable to reprise the Jennifer role for the second and third movies, which were shot back to back, she was replaced with Elizabeth Shue. And considering how the first movie ended, it seemed like the actress would have a sizable role in the two sequels. But as it turns out, Jennifer actually faints mere minutes into the second movie and wakes up for a few crucial moments at the end of the first act, but then faints again, with Marty and Doc leaving her passed out on her porch. Jennifer then disappears for the entire rest of the movie and isn't seen again until the end of part 3, where she reappears for a few scant minutes while reuniting with Marty. On the trilogy's DVD release, filmmakers Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale even discussed Jennifer's tiny role in the sequels, and mentioned that if they'd known they were actually going to produce a sequel, they wouldn't have had Jennifer get in the DeLorean with Marty and Doc at the end of the first movie. Liam Neeson, Battleship. Back when an adaptation of the Hasbro board game Battleship was first announced, it was met with a combination of laughter and eye rolls. That Hollywood had finally become so idea-deprived that it would now be adapting the most thinly premised of name IP. Yet many had their interest piqued when Liam Neeson was confirmed to be part of the ensemble cast, because how could you make this movie and not have him whisper in his gruff Irish drawl, "Nobody sinks my battleship"? Well, despite Neeson being introduced as the steely commander of the US Pacific Fleet, Admiral Terrence Shane, he is bafflingly absent for the bulk of the action-packed alien invasion shenanigans. After his first act introduction, Shane is basically gone until he scrambles assistance in the finale, and then spends the final scene of the movie telling his future son-in-law, Lieutenant Alex Hopper, that they're going to eat chicken burritos for lunch. This was even more of a blatant paycheck role for Neeson than the Taken sequels, because while those movies at least asked him to move around and pretend to punch people, all he does here is stand around and spit expository dialogue. Noomi Rapace, the girl who kicked the Hornets' nest. The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest was the third and final entry into the original Swedish adaptations of the Millennium series, and begins with franchise protagonist Lisbeth Salander airlifted to hospital following grim injuries she sustained in the previous film. So yeah, you can probably see where this is going, right? Well, Noomi Rapace, a brilliant actress who so perfectly embodied the Lisbeth from the books, spends the entire first half of the film stuck in a hospital bed talking to other characters. The narrative focus instead shifts to journalist Blomqvist as he attempts to clear Lisbeth of several murder charges. And even once Lisbeth leaves hospital, she remains in police custody and is then taken to court for her murder trial. Only then, in the final 10 minutes of the movie, is Lisbeth released from custody, where she quickly deals with the antagonist and has one final reunion with Blomqvist, Kelly Marie Tran, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. While Mark Hamill's role in Star Wars: The Force Awakens was disappointingly small, at least this wasn't at all a surprise for the actor himself, who got a far more substantial showing in sequel The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi also introduced audiences to plucky resistance fighter Rose Tico, and given that she was established to be Finn's love interest by the film's end, it seemed like a given that she'd have a major role in threequel The Rise of Skywalker. And so, many fans were disappointed to see Rose's role reduced to that of a quasi-cameo, if you can even call it that. In this flick, Rose is relegated to a totally insignificant background role, totaling around 76 seconds and just a few throwaway lines of dialogue. Well, as it turns out, Rose was originally written to spend most of the movie with General Leia, and following Carrie Fisher's death, the crew used discarded footage from the two previous movies to keep Leia in the film. But the constraints of this approach speak for themselves, and given the threequel's infamously seat-of-the-pants production, you can kind of see why some characters fell through the cracks. Will Smith, After Earth. As intriguing as the pairing of M. Night Shyamalan and Will Smith for an original sci-fi blockbuster sounded on paper, the end result just wasn't it, at all. While on a purely narrative level it's not particularly interesting, After Earth's fatal flaw was casting Will Smith as an apparent co-lead with his son Jaden, only to ground him for the entire damn movie. As the preposterously monikered Ranger Cypher Rage, Smith is immediately grounded when Cypher's ship crash lands on Earth and his legs are broken, forcing his son to seek help and step up into the hero role. At this point, the focus shifts to Jaden Smith's character, with Cypher being shoved into a peripheral role, providing guidance to his son, all the while Shyamalan periodically cuts back to Will Smith, typically sat down and reading off a screen, to remind you that he indeed did come to set at least. Now, casting Will Smith in an original blockbuster, and sidelining him for almost the entire runtime was a creative own goal that somehow passed through the hands of countless creatives and studio goons without challenge.